All right. Good day, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of Splints and Whiskey. For Splints and Whiskey, we have an awesome opportunity. We have a community built up of people that are adrenaline junkies for EMT, EMS, military medicine. We've got Navy medicine, Army medicine, Marines, Space Force, Air Force, medics, paramedics, and gosh, so many different trainers, executive protectors all across the globe that listen to this podcast. And we're so thrilled today. I have the opportunity to introduce you guys to one of my dear friends that's just become a good friend this year. And we found each other because of talking about training. I'm going to have him introduce himself to you so that he can just kind of give you his entire resume. But gosh, this is Joseph Ashley. He has an awesome story, an awesome company, and I love seeing what he and his company are doing for innovating for us in the field, talking with military medicine as well as first responders on the number one reason why we lose our battle buddies, and that's hemorrhage control. Joseph put together for the United States Army, they put together uh, a trainer that it's like 3-in-1. I always know that. I'm always selling different newer and events. This is a making, and I know that it's saving a lot of lives out in the field. So Joseph, I wanted to know, first I want to say welcome to the show, Joseph Ashley,
Yeah, thank you.
co-founder of Rapid Deployment Medical Training, and they go by RDMT. And Joseph, will you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us kind of how it started, kind of just like a verbal resume, and then we'll just talk about training and talk about your product and go from there.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm Joseph. Thanks for having me. So I'm a biomedical engineer from Georgia Tech. That's where I met my co-founder. That's kind of where our journey began for this company. And so we were interns for the United States Army. We worked down at Fort Stewart in Hinesville, Georgia. We didn't really know what to expect. We were part of a program that matches college students, mostly engineering majors with missions or contracts that the military needs. And so they shipped us down to Fort Stewart. We worked 9 to 5 on base for a whole summer in the Innovation Center, which was super, super interesting. And so part of our internship was kind of just helping out around the Innovation Center, teaching soldiers how to use 3D printing or modeling technology. That was super rewarding, just seeing them come in with problems they had, try to help them figure out like what those solutions look like, get a working model out in like a week or two, and then have them go make a difference kind of in their units. So that part was super rewarding.
Yeah.
And the other side of that was us working on making better training equipment. And so the pitch we kind of got was, hey, look, there's another student group that came before you guys. They made a wound packing block. And so we've been using that to train. It doesn't bleed. It's just a model. But they're like, if you guys can make something like this, that'd be awesome. And so we figure we can probably take it a little bit further than that. So we asked around, we interviewed a lot of instructors, a lot of medics, really anybody who had been through tactical combat casualty care training. And we landed on the rapid hemorrhaging section because we figured that's probably the most impactful. And we also found it was the area that was the most lacking in training equipment, at least in terms of the units around us had. And so through our interviews, we figured out that, you're going to need to practice wound packing. You're going to need to practice tourniquet application. And so through our interviews, we kind of figured out we could start with an arm. It's the easiest to model, the easiest to modify. And so with our resources on base, we started 3D printing model arms. We added cube sections to them so that we could actually practice wound packing with different kinds of wounds. So bullet, shrapnel, gash, and kind of whatever the soldiers could think of that week is the wounds that we tried to model. And then we also added a section for tourniquet application that's responsive when you actually apply the tourniquet. And so if you put one on, you pump blood through the arm, you tighten the tourniquet down, it will actually stop bleeding. And so that kind of fulfilled the goals that the military was really asking for us, which was they wanted clear visual feedback and they wanted some sort of variability. And so we made the wounds interchangeable so that you could, actually, okay, one day you're going to have a bullet wound on the bicep. The next day you're going to be practicing on a stab wound on the forearm. And that way, if you're training 30, 40 guys in a row, you're not just seeing the first 3 get some critical thinking practice. You're seeing all of the people get critical thinking practice. And that addressed, the gaps of what they actually needed. And then, of course, the other thing that we found was that, units would have access to really expensive training aids sometimes. So like full mannequins, 50, $100,000. They'd move and breathe and bleed. But those were typically in the Mystics, and it was kind of logistically difficult for units to get access to those. And so they needed
Yeah.
things they could buy with their discretionary spending, such that the units could just have them and they're like, okay, we have a free 2 hours. I want to make sure everybody in my unit is trained on putting on a tourniquet and packing a wound. So they're ready to do it if something happens. They don't have a full day to necessarily go stop by at the Mystic, do the training. What they really needed was, okay, let's spend some of our discretionary spending, have a few training aids for this lying around. And then we have that free time. I can send, 5 or 10 soldiers at a time to go train on these. And so that's really the gap that we tried to fill with our training aid, just in terms of functionality and also price.
Yo, congratulations on catching that key fact. What you just said at the end. Mystics, for those who aren't Army, is a medical simulation training centers for the United States Army. I think there's roughly 18 across the country, and they're awesome, but not everybody can go to a Mystic. I like that you have known about the discretionary funds and that you have those laying around. That's a big reason why I love to have task trainers, and yours has three different areas, but there are three different requirements for Army, Navy, Air Force, TCCC, and TECC, of course, for our law enforcement. So I like that. I'm glad that that's something that they conveyed to you and you guys listened to them, because I've been selling to the military for a long time. And yeah, it's awesome when I can sell to a big MTF, which is like a hospital medical treatment facility, or a Mystic. That's amazing. And I'm certainly proud of myself. However, my regular day-to-day guys that are saving lives, sailors, soldiers, everybody that are out in the field saving lives, they need that constant muscle memory build up training when they're kind of sitting on their hands for a little bit, or like if they were to be deployed. It's nice to be able to have something that's compact that they can take with them deployed, and that they can still train on, kind of when they've got some free time, like what you're doing. That's awesome. So, when did it come out? And then did you launch the actual arm at Fort Stewart and they used it for a summer, or how did that all come about?
So we did the work at Fort Stewart, not this most recent summer, but the summer before. So I guess about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And so we made it in about 6 weeks. I was kind of like the first prototype and got that out, had some medics and some soldiers use it for their training. They really liked it. So we're like, okay, we should probably, keep working on this. We spent like the last 4 weeks of it kind of just making like a slightly more useful model that like wasn't going to break, because all of this was like rapid prototyping at the Innovation Center. So that was more of a model that was like ready for them to actually take out to the field and use. The feedback we got from that one was really great. We took it to the center where all the medics were, and they were like, "Hey, can we just keep this?" I guess so. That was certainly good feedback that they wanted it. So we left one with them. We kind of laid out the ideas and kind of like the concepts for how to like make them and maintain them with Fort Stewart. And we didn't really know where to go from there. We figured that the Army would keep them, keep producing them. But we had our boss, I guess, kind of sit us down. And he was like, look, the military's not going to make these. This is just not what we do. Let's work on getting you guys the intellectual property, because if you guys can actually get these out to a lot of units, it's going to save a lot of lives. So that was like really awesome to hear for us. One, just it's like, okay, we did our job. Like, we're engineers, we made the good product, but also to hear that like he wanted it to continue and he could see the change that it would make. And so from there, it was a decently long process. Took us about 6 months or so to go through all the paperwork and talk to all of the lawyers and make sure we could get the IP transferred. But we did that. We founded a company, we started working on it, and then we released kind of the finished model, I guess you would call it, that was like our company version last February. So just about a year that the first model came out to sell. We started selling those mostly to EMTs, police, fire, really anybody on the civilian side who was going to be doing this kind of training. We got great reception from our first few customers. And so then I guess about 3 months ago now, we released kind of like the V2 model of the arm, which is the one that we're currently selling.
Yeah, awesome. And it's just just because it broke up a little bit when we were talking about the capabilities of it earlier. You have three requirements, if you will, or skills that it would train on, correct? There's three, and they're interchangeable. So the three is wound packing, and this is an arm. So wound packing, tourniquet training, tourniquet placement. The third is what?
conversion training.
Yeah, tourniquet.
Yes.
That's awesome. So one of our Mystic guys on the West Coast actually, sat with you, looked at your product. First, his first objection, which I've heard, and I like to go ahead and put those objections out there, is, hey, we don't pack arms. We don't wound pack arms. And later, after he really saw it, he did change his mind and he goes, actually, we could use that like crazy. Like he was like, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't really catch how killer this thing was. So that was the first thing. But then he also said, wow, this is like one of the first things I've ever seen where you could do real tourniquet conversion. Um, that is huge for everybody. Have you had any gotten any feedback from people utilizing it in that way, like a success story for these different skills? First, tourniquet conversion, if you have, because I think that that's an area that we undertrain on, and so we could end up either amputating or we could end up, just doing something that's ineffective. And as you know, with the military medicine, we're really pushing right after TCCC, prolonged field care, right? So instead of the golden hour, we've got the golden 72 hours at this point. We cannot get you out of the dirt as quickly as we could at Vietnam. So now we need to keep that patient healthy and we don't want to cut off the blood supply for 4 days. So tell me about tourniquet conversion, if you don't mind, and then we can move into other successes if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Frankly, we haven't had a ton of feedback about tourniquet conversion training, but we have started talking to like SWAT teams, really anybody who's going to be in like maybe a prolonged type of active shooter situation.
Yeah.
But because most of our early customers are on the civilian side, our hope is that they are never in a situation where tourniquet conversion should be necessary. I mean, you have that like 4 hour window where you can slap on a tourniquet and really not worry about it very much. But the military is the one that it's going to be really important for because, like you said, there might be a 72-hour window before you're able to like have someone take off the tourniquet and have like medical personnel around to deal with that. Whereas mostly for our customers, like I think certainly for like natural disaster sort of settings or maybe like really dangerous or chaotic active shooter settings, you should understand tourniquet conversion training. But frankly, since our customers right now are mostly on the civilian side, we thankfully they have not had to really practice that very much.
Yeah, yeah. I live in Portsmouth, Virginia, and but my family's in Atlanta, so I mean, I'm very familiar with where you are. But one of the closest fire geographies, I guess, departments near me is not, I live in Portsmouth, but it's called Suffolk, Virginia. It's Suffolk. And Suffolk is the largest in terms of size, like square footage size, not person per capita by any means, but just how large it is on a map. Suffolk is the largest fire department and the largest kind of like territory for law enforcement, paramedics, fighters, EMTs in Virginia. And so there are areas there where it might not be 3 or 4 minutes, but it might not be an active shooter either. It could be maybe be um, the paramedics need to get to these people that might have been doing some work out on their farm and they cut themselves on a blade like some sort of major laceration, something like that, where that could be a place where even if we have a lot of us stop the bleed and training, ongoing training in that county because of the size of it and how it takes a little bit longer for EMTs to get there. But I look at a place like that, that's an area for tourniquet conversion. Just if I don't know if someone's just out it's just in a more remote area. But gosh, for the military, I think you're right on the money for what they're training for as long as they are. It's nice to have task trainers too, because you brought up mannequins, and I like them for several reasons. I like the price. Yours is roughly like $1,500 roughly. That's MSRP. So if it's a government account, it might be a little less, but that's awesome. I mean, you could get two with a credit card. Really, with a lower credit card, you could get a lot more if you were at an MTF. Tell me about have you heard any? Tell me about some of the EMTs and EMS group or law enforcement that's using it. Have they given you any good feedback, like helping them with muscle memory or maybe a success story for any of the tasks that it does that you train on?
So we're working with one of our very first customers now. They're about a year out of using it on training. And so we're kind of cooking up, nothing super concrete yet, but working on tracking all of the people who trained on our arms, and just seeing like their outcomes in the field. So I'll keep you updated on that. We're hoping to kind of get more information about that soon, because what they found when they looked at like the very rough data is that like they were putting on a lot more tourniquets than they thought they were going to be putting on. And the people who had trained like on our arm were putting on tourniquets. So still waiting tentatively on sort of the specifics of that data, but super excited to hear about that now that like we can actually talk about the effect of it. As far as like basic success stories, we definitely know it builds confidence just in wound packing and tourniquet application. Certainly training civilians, like outside of first responders, we work with Stop the Bleed. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're just training community members. And like that training is super interesting to see, because usually police, fire, EMS already have some concept, right, of how to put on a tourniquet, how to pack a wound. And they're at least like practiced. Training with the community is very interesting just because you really hear like they're cranking down the tourniquet, and we've done like really hard work to make sure it's comparable to the amount of force you would need on an actual person's arm. And so when they're cranking it down, we hear a lot like, oh, this is like hard. Like, yes, that's
Yeah.
like
Good.
it's not as easy as you think it's going to be, and we would much rather you figure that out now than the first time you're actually having to put it on. And that's
Yeah.
another reason why like the visual feedback is so important. We want you to crank down the tourniquet until the bleeding stops, not until your buddy's uncomfortable or until they're like squirming around. You really need to be able to connect it to that like very clear visual feedback of the bleeding stopping, and that's another thing we get very good feedback on.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when the first time that I had done one, I could not believe how much I had to twist and twist and twist and twist. You know what I mean? And you felt, and if I would have done that on my battle buddy, if I did that, me and you practicing together, I did it on your arm, I wouldn't do it that hard, because I wouldn't want
Right.
to hurt you. I mean, and because I'm so strong, but I wouldn't want to do that. So I love that it gives you like real haptic. I mean, that's awesome. Tell me what's in the works moving forward. Are you possibly doing a leg? Because I know my Mystic guys wanted a leg.
Leg is coming next. The design is like mostly done. We want to do some like quality control to make sure that the wounds themselves are like really solid. And that's one good thing about the leg. I know people complain like we don't pack arms very often. I thing that I say to that is usually that a bullet wound is not that dissimilar on an arm than it is from a leg. The anatomy is going to be different, but the actual mechanics of packing it, you're looking for the muscle memory. It's not going to change that much. But of course, to get it the most anatomically close, to get the best practice, we are making a leg. And that's really going to open us up to be able to create more exotic wounds, because, there's not that much space on an arm. If we're having bullet wounds, gash wounds, shrapnel, you can get a good replication of them. But on the legs, we can create much larger wounds with much more interesting profiles. One thing that we want to create more is like burn and shrapnel wounds, just with how we're seeing modern warfare kind of develop. We think those are probably going to be pretty good ones to train on. So even though it's kind of unfortunate, it's like what we want to be able to replicate. But the leg will have the same features. You're still going to be able to put on a tourniquet, see the bleeding stop. You're still going to have multiple sections that you can change out to pack different wounds. And so it's really going to be the same value, just with like a much bigger medium, because obviously there's a lot more surface area on the leg.
Yeah, that's awesome. Recently, like in the past 6 months, I was kind of doing like my own little poll to some of the higher ranking leaders, I guess, military medicine leaders. And I asked them, like, what are we missing? What's next? I'm not a manufacturer and I'm not even a healthcare provider. As you know, I just love this stuff and I love helping people. And this is just like my jam. So luckily I've been accepted into the community as a small imposter, but I'm still in. Thank God. But because I got good prices and I'm funny. But I asked this one who he'd spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and then he's aware of like intel of where we could go next, right? So we are discussing stuff and he said, whatever you do, man, really start building some blast wounds. More stuff with the blast. He hated it too, right? But we have like so many, and I sell them. I sell them from different companies, different types of blast mannequins or blast arms, legs, whatever. However, I still think that with what we've been seeing, with the most recent conflicts, that's a great place to start and to find out from people, really in other countries too. Tell me what you're exactly seeing. I wanted to ask you about the Georgia Tech. You are interesting to me. You and Cole. Cole is your partner, right? And I don't even know if I've met Cole. I think I've just liked him on LinkedIn. But I wanted to ask about this because it's something that I've run into and I'm not an engineer. 3D printing. How do you feel? Is this going to be like I don't know, 3D printing to me, when I'm out in the field in medical simulation, I'm seeing a lot of lay people kick out medical stuff that they're 3D printing, and then you're hearing about all these ghost guns that are 3D printed and like everything is 3D printed. Is that a hindrance to you, or like tell me what your thought is on being a manufacturer in sim, in medical training like you are, and then the use of the 3D printer like as an engineer, because I think that that's an area I'm seeing all these people come into simulation who maybe, never planned on it, but they bought a 3D printer, but they're not an
Right.
engineer and you know what you're doing. So tell me what your opinion is just on that whole growth, if you don't mind. It's probably a pretty broad question, but I've wondered it a lot.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we use 3D printing a ton. That's certainly no secret. Like we 3D print the majority of like our products.
Yeah.
And there are like pieces that are silicone. You can't really 3D print silicone yet. That would be pretty cool if somebody was to come up with that. You
Should.
and maybe that's the next product, slight pivot, but no, you can't 3D print that part yet. So we 3D print the parts of the arms that, aren't the actual wounds or the actual tourniquet sections. But it's been super helpful for us. Obviously, being engineers, we have a little bit more of the background of like knowing how to design things in a more formal way, which is helpful. But I think 3D printing is probably really good for this industry because it just allows you to make something with value very quickly. I'm like, we scanned my co-founder's arm into some software. We made a bunch of edits, and within 6 weeks, we had a working product that could provide value to the military. And so that's something that they're trying to do on a bunch of different bases. So like the innovation center that we worked out on base, just chock full of 3D printers. It really gives soldiers the opportunity to like do a lot of cool things themselves, and it's not
Yeah.
terribly difficult to figure out. So I think it's a net good thing. I mean, it used to be 3D printing was kind of like gimmicky. You couldn't really make anything super complicated with it. But it's come a long way in the past few years, and we've certainly benefited from that.
Yeah, that I love that you said that because that's how I've seen it. Let's say 5 years ago, or maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I first started, I only had one command, maybe one or two commands that 3D printed anything. And it was just if they couldn't find it, but these were like cream of the crop. They had the biggest budget and they had a 3D printer, but that was it, right? And then people just started popping up with them, and then you start seeing some really bad stuff, like horrible looking ears and noses and stuff that are just bad. But then when I met you and I saw your arm, I know people use 3D printers, of course, and we all do. But I wondered what you thought. Is it a good thing or a bad thing for the industry? I agree. I think that you have whether or not your product competition never bothers me. I mean, look at what I sell now. I mean, you can buy moulage from just about everybody that I sell from, right? I mean, I have mannequin, there are different mannequins, blah, blah, blah. But I think that competition is healthy. I want my customers to get what they want. That's why we've got so many different tourniquets. What are you comfortable with? How can you save a life? But I think you guys certainly have the edge on that. You are experts at the 3D printer. It's not, this is not a fraternity party that you just started, 3D printing with some of the stuff. When 3D printers started getting cheap, oh my gosh, some of the body parts I saw, I was like, oh my Lord, they just weren't that quality, but yours is. And then it's covered with silicone. Tell me about repetition. How many reps, like, well, I guess you're not even poking it, are you? You're not even IV arming it. Yeah. So it, you might sell yourself out of business. You realize this, right? Because it's going to be so quality.
Right. We've moved towards like the modular aspect of it. Like that's one thing we think is really great. Like our wounds are modular, so you can switch them around. We're also working on making the arm itself modular so that you can actually like take the front half off and now you can use an amputation wound. So being able to do stuff like that kind of gives us some leeway. But yes, definitely making them really durable. As engineers, we're like, this is great. These things are nearly indestructible. And then we're like, what happens if people just buy them and then they never have to buy one again?
You're done. I know.
Right.
This is an occupational hazard because when you're a good engineer, you make a good product and then you're going to sell yourself out of business. Just keep on making body parts, and keep on talking to all of these medics and heroes and they'll tell us what's next. Unfortunately, God, I'm never surprised anymore when I see something weird on the news. All right, well, tell me, so if people want to get in touch with you, of course, I mean, please, anybody can call me. I work with Joseph and RDMT, but there places they could, well, of course, they can go to your website, and I'll put that up too, but so that they can
Awesome.
see some of your videos and see some of the articles and the utility. And in the future, do you think that are you just going to keep going? I mean, is this your field now? That this is what you kind of fell upon it with the project, and then it ended up becoming a life-saving tool. So are you kind of sold on it now that you've seen?
I think so. It's kind of hard to leave. I'm sure you definitely understand. You do so much legwork to like understand all the lingo and like make all the connections and kind of, figure out how to talk to everybody, all the channels, the shows you need to go to. So now we're here. We're pretty committed. We're certainly gonna, write out the arm, the leg, maybe a torso next.
Whoa.
See how it goes.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you for being on today. This has been really, really, really cool. And I would love to say to the listeners, because we have some pretty active listeners. I mean, these guys are in the field every single day, guys and girls, every day, living the life. I mean, chugging the Kool-Aid. And I would challenge them to give you feedback after watching this. After looking at the arm, watching this, I have demos, guys. If you want to call me, I can send you some demos or come out. We could do a Zoom call or Teams, or I can come out to your command. But, we could definitely give these guys some feedback. One thing that I have found with working with so many manufacturers over the years is that it's the ones that are nimble and flexible and able to listen to what you're telling them, like these guys did, and actually make it and execute. We've got these larger companies that, yeah, I can buy a bunch of IV arms or legs or whatever, but I cannot customize it at all. And this day and age, stuff is changing every minute. We need to be able to customize some stuff, and that's what these guys can do. I mean, bioengineers, good Lord, I think that's what it's called. But thank you so much for being on, and thanks for the impact you're making in the field and manufacturing. And I want to thank our guests. If you want to learn more, I mean, our listeners, if you want to learn more about Joseph Ashley and Cole and RDMT, then please reach out to me, send me a message, or find them on LinkedIn or any of the social media platforms. They're doing some awesome stuff down there. And I think, Joseph, you're getting your master's too right now?
Masters.
You big stud. So you're also he is like a co-founder, CEO, and getting his master's all at once. Oh my goodness. You are awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And that'll wrap up this episode of Splints and Whiskey. I look forward to hearing some awesome stories and then seeing our soldiers, sailors, airmen, EMTs, paramedics, everybody help save lives with RDMT. So thank you, Joseph.
Much for having me.
Sure. Thanks for coming on. You're awesome. You guys have an awesome week, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Splits and Whiskey next Monday. All right. Thank you so much, and everybody have an awesome day. Thank you, Joseph.